The laughter didn't come all at once. It began as a ripple, a soft, almost polite chuckle from the far end of the table, the kind that could be mistaken for amusement rather than mockery. But then it spread, catching on to other voices, growing louder, sharper, until it filled the high-ceilinged dining room like a swarm of invisible needles. Clara Whitmore sat perfectly still. Her fingers rested lightly against the stem of her wine glass, though she hadn't taken a sip in several minutes. The deep red liquid inside reflected the chandelier above fractured light, trembling with every subtle vibration of the table. "I'm sorry," Daniel's mother said, dabbing at the corner of her lips with a linen napkin. Her smile stretched thin with restrained laughter. "It's just a restaurant manager. I didn't realize that was a long-term plan." Another wave of laughter followed, quieter this time, but heavier. Clara felt it land on her skin. She didn't look at them, not yet. Instead, her gaze drifted to the window behind them, where the Chicago skyline shimmered against the night. Glass towers lit like constellations, lives unfolding behind each pane, unseen, unknown, uninterrupted. She wondered briefly what it would feel like to be inside one of those lives instead. "She works very hard," Daniel said. His voice was calm, measured, too measured. Clara turned her head slightly, just enough to catch his profile. He wasn't looking at her. His eyes were fixed somewhere between his father's glass of bourbon and the centerpiece of white orchids, arranged with clinical perfection. "She manages a team," he added, as if reading from a script he didn't believe in. A pause. Then his father leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly under the shift of his weight. "Yes, well," he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Hard work is admirable. But ambition, that's what defines a person. Wouldn't you agree?" His gaze landed on Clara now. Direct, appraising. It wasn't the kind of look that tried to understand. It was the kind that measured and dismissed. Clara finally smiled. It was a small smile, controlled, the kind she had practiced over years of dealing with difficult customers, late-night complaints, and the quiet humiliation of being underestimated. "I do have ambition," she said gently. "Oh," Daniel's sister leaned forward, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "And what does that look like? Owning your own little cafe someday." There it was, not just mockery, but limitation. A box carefully constructed and offered as her ceiling. Clara inhaled slowly. The air in the room felt heavier now, laced with something she couldn't quite name. Not just judgment, but expectation. As if they were waiting for her to confirm what they already believed. That she didn't belong here. "I'm not sure I'd call it little," Clara replied, her voice still calm. "But I suppose that depends on perspective." Another silence, sharper this time. Daniel shifted beside her, finally glancing in her direction. There was something in his eyes, something fleeting, almost apologetic. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Clara has always been practical," he said. "Practical." The word settled into her chest like a stone. Not passionate, not driven, not brilliant. Practical. She looked down at her hands. There was a faint scar along her thumb, a thin white line from years ago when a kitchen knife had slipped during a double shift. She remembered the blood, the sting, the way she had wrapped it quickly and kept working because there was no one else to cover her station. Practical. "Yes," Daniel's mother said approvingly. "That's important, especially when one marries into a family like ours. Stability matters." Clara almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of how precise it was. Marrying into a family like ours. Not joining, not becoming. Entering. As if she were stepping into something already complete, something that required her to adjust, to shrink, to fit. "And how did you two meet again?" the sister asked, tilting her head. "At the restaurant," Daniel answered quickly. "Of course," she said, smiling. "That makes sense." Clara felt it again, that subtle shift in tone. The implication wrapped inside the words. "Of course. Where else would someone like you come from?" The chandelier above flickered slightly, or maybe it was just her vision. For a moment, she imagined standing up, pushing her chair back, letting it scrape loudly against the polished floor, saying something sharp, something unforgettable, something that would slice through the polite cruelty and leave them speechless. But she didn't, because she had learned a long time ago that silence could be more powerful than reaction. That dignity wasn't always loud. Still, there was a limit, and she could feel herself approaching it. I actually think it's wonderful, Daniel's mother continued her tone, softening just enough to sound generous. It's refreshing, really. Not everyone needs to chase extraordinary things. Clara looked up, and this time she met her gaze directly. There was no anger in her eyes, only clarity. I don't think you know what I'm chasing, Clara said quietly. The room stilled. Even the air seemed to pause. For a second, no one spoke. Then the sound of the front door opening echoed faintly from somewhere beyond the dining room. A servant's hurried footsteps followed. And then a voice, low, confident, unmistakably out of place in the carefully controlled atmosphere of the evening. Apologies for the intrusion, the voice said. I believe I was invited. Clara's breath caught. Not because of the interruption, but because she recognized that voice. Before she even turned around, she knew exactly who had just walked into the room. And for the first time that night, the balance of power began to shift. The room didn't just quiet down, it rearranged itself. Not physically, the crystal glasses, the silverware, the immaculate folds of linen remained untouched, but something deeper shifted beneath the surface. Like a current reversing direction, subtle at first, then undeniable. Clara turned slowly. Victor Hale stood near the entrance, framed by the soft glow of the hallway lights behind him. He wasn't dressed to impress, not in the way Daniel's family understood it. No tuxedo, no polished performance. Just a dark overcoat draped effortlessly over a tailored suit, the kind of understated precision that spoke of confidence rather than wealth. But it wasn't his appearance that changed the room. It was presence, the kind that didn't ask for attention, it claimed it. Mr. Hale, Daniel's father said, rising abruptly from his seat. His voice, once relaxed and condescending, now carried a sharp edge of surprise. This is, unexpected. Victor offered a brief nod, his gaze sweeping the table with quiet awareness, before settling briefly on Clara. Not lingering, not performative, just acknowledging. I was in the area, Victor replied. Daniel mentioned the dinner. I thought I'd stop by and offer my congratulations. His tone was neutral, polite, but there was something beneath it, something Clara couldn't quite name. Daniel stood now too, adjusting his jacket instinctively. Of course. Yes, we're honored you came. Honored. Clara almost didn't recognize his voice. Victor stepped further into the room, handing his coat off without looking. The staff moved quickly, efficiently, a silent choreography Clara knew all too well. She watched it unfold with a strange sense of detachment, like seeing a reflection of her own world projected into this one. Please, Daniel's mother said, gesturing toward an empty seat at the table. Join us. Victor hesitated, only for a second. Then he pulled out the chair, not the one offered, the one beside Clara, a subtle shift, but not a small one. He sat down without comment, adjusting his cufflinks with a calm precision. Up close, Clara could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, not from age, but from years of observation. Calculation. Experience. Clara, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Just her name. She swallowed. Mr. Hale. A pause. Then, almost imperceptibly, his expression changed. Not into a smile. Something softer than that. You can call me Victor, he said. Across the table, Daniel's sister shifted slightly, her brows knitting together. You two know each other? Victor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for the wine bottle, examining the label briefly before pouring himself a glass with steady hands. We've worked together, he said. Worked. The word landed differently now. Daniel's father leaned forward, interest sharpening his features. Ah, of course. Clara mentioned she works at one of your establishments. One of your establishments. Ownership, hierarchy, distance. Victor set the bottle down carefully. She does more than work there, he said. Silence. It stretched thin and fragile. Clara felt her pulse quicken, not from fear, but from something dangerously close to exposure. Clara has been instrumental in restructuring operations over the past year. Victor continued, his tone even. Staff retention, menu development, cost efficiency. The turnaround speaks for itself. Daniel blinked. Once, then again. I didn't realize his mother began, but her voice faltered, because she didn't know how to finish that sentence. I didn't realize she mattered. I didn't realize she was capable. I didn't realize I was wrong. Clara kept her gaze steady, though her fingers tightened slightly in her lap. This wasn't how she wanted it to happen. Not like this, not in front of them. It was a team effort, Clara said quietly. Victor glanced at her. There it was again, that almost smile. Yes, he said. But not everyone on a team leads. The air shifted again. Daniel cleared his throat, forcing a small laugh. Clara tends to downplay things. Downplay. Another word, another quiet reduction. Victor didn't look at him. Instead, he took a sip of his wine, as if considering something far more complex than the conversation unfolding. Modesty can be a useful trait, he said, but it's often mistaken for lack of value. Daniel's father leaned back slowly, studying Victor now with a different kind of attention. Not casual, not dismissive, evaluating. And you believe Clara has value, he asked? The question was careful, but not kind. Victor set his glass down. The soft clink echoed louder than it should have. I don't believe in vague terms like that, he said. Value isn't theoretical. It's measurable. A pause. Then, she saved a division that was on the verge of collapse. The words didn't explode. They settled. Heavy, unavoidable. Clara felt the weight of them press against her chest. Across the table, Daniel went completely still. You never told me that, he said, his voice quieter now. Clara turned to him, and for the first time that night there was no softness in her expression. You never asked, she replied. It wasn't accusatory. That was what made it worse. It was simply true. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. Because there was nothing to argue with, nothing to defend. Victor leaned back slightly in his chair, observing the exchange without interruption. Not interfering, just allowing. The silence that followed was different now, no longer filled with polite cruelty, but with something far more uncomfortable. Recognition. Daniel's sister shifted again, her earlier confidence gone. So, you're saying Clara is... What? Some kind of executive? Clara almost flinched at the phrasing. Some kind of. As if her identity still needed to be shaped into something acceptable. Victor didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked at Clara. Not over her, not through her, at her. As if the answer belonged to her, not him. Clara felt it, that subtle offering. A choice. To step forward. Or remain where she had always been placed. She inhaled slowly. I manage people, she said. I solve problems. I make sure things don't fall apart. Simple. Direct. True. Victor nodded once. And she does it better than most people I've hired in the last decade. This time, no one laughed. Daniel's mother lowered her gaze to her plate, her fingers adjusting the edge of her napkin with quiet precision. The performance of control. But the illusion had cracked. Daniel looked at Clara again, really looked this time, as if seeing her from a distance he hadn't realized existed. Why didn't you tell me? He asked softly. The question lingered. Clara held his gaze. And in that moment, she understood something she hadn't fully allowed herself to see before. It wasn't that he didn't know her. It was that he had never needed to. I thought you already knew who I was, she said. A beat. Then she looked away, because holding that truth for too long felt like standing too close to a fire. Victor reached for his glass again, but he didn't drink. Perception, he said quietly, almost to himself, is a fragile thing. No one responded. Because now they understood. The dinner didn't end, not yet. But something far more important had. The version of Clara they thought they knew. And in its place, something far more difficult to dismiss had begun to emerge. The dinner continued, at least in the most technical sense of the word. Plates were replaced, wine was refilled, polite questions were asked, and carefully measured answers were given. From the outside, everything still resembled the kind of evening Daniel's family had perfected over decades, controlled, elegant, untouched by discomfort. But beneath it, nothing was the same. Clara could feel it in the way the conversation no longer flowed naturally, but instead moved in calculated steps, like people walking across thin ice. Every word chosen, Every glance measured, every silence heavier than before. Daniel's mother spoke again, eventually her voice softer now, almost cautious. So, Clara, how long have you been in hospitality? Hospitality. Not leadership, not operations. A safer word, a smaller one. Clara noticed it. Of course she did. About 8 years, she replied. That's quite a commitment, his mother said, nodding slowly. It must be demanding. It sounded like concern. It wasn't. Clara had learned to recognize the difference. It is, she said simply. Daniel shifted beside her. She started young, he added. Worked her way up. Worked her way up. This time it wasn't dismissive. But it wasn't quite pride either. Something in between. Something uncertain. Victor, who had remained mostly silent since his earlier remarks, finally spoke again. She didn't just work her way up, he said. She rebuilt systems most people didn't even realize were broken. The table stilled again. Not as sharply as before, but enough. Daniel's father leaned forward, folding his hands together. You speak very highly of her, Mr. Hale. I speak accurately, Victor replied. A beat passed. Then Daniel's father smiled, not warmly, but strategically. And yet she's still managing a floor. There it was again. The subtle insistence on hierarchy, on position, on visible status. Victor didn't react immediately. He studied the man across from him for a moment, as if deciding how much truth the room could handle. Titles don't always reflect influence, he said finally. Daniel's sister let out a quiet breath, almost a scoff. That sounds like something people say when they don't have one. Clara felt the words brush against her, but they didn't land the same way anymore. Not after what had already been said. Not after what had been revealed. Victor turned his head slightly, looking at her. Again, that silent question. Clara understood it now. He wasn't here to defend her. He was here to stop her from hiding. I turned down the promotion, Clara said. The words came out calm, clear, intentional. Daniel blinked. What Clara kept her gaze forward. 6 months ago. Victor offered me a corporate position. Silence. Thicker this time. More personal. Why would you do that? Daniel asked. His voice edged with something she couldn't quite place. Confusion. Or maybe frustration. Clara exhaled slowly. Because my mother was in the hospital, she said. And I couldn't leave. No one spoke. Not immediately. Because this was not something they had prepared for. Not something that fit neatly into their understanding of her. Daniel's mother shifted uncomfortably. You never mentioned that. Clara almost smiled. You never asked, she said again. The words echoed differently now. Less defensive. More final. Victor remained still beside her, but she could feel his attention sharpen. Not intrusive, just present. Daniel leaned back slightly, running a hand through his hair. I knew she was sick, he said quietly. I just didn't realize it was that serious. Clara turned to him slowly. There was no anger in her expression, only something colder. You didn't come to the hospital, she said. It wasn't a question. Daniel hesitated. You said you had it under control. Yes, Clara replied. Because I did. Another pause. Longer this time. Because now they weren't talking about her job anymore. They were talking about something else. Something far more fragile. Victor's voice broke the silence, low and steady. Control can be misleading. Clara didn't look at him, but she understood what he meant. Daniel exhaled, leaning forward again. Why didn't you tell me you were offered the promotion? There it was. Not concern, not regret. Focus. On the opportunity. On what it meant. Clara studied him for a moment, really studied him. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but quietly. Like a realization settling into place after years of being ignored. Would it have changed anything, she asked. Daniel frowned. Of course it would have. How she pressed. He opened his mouth, then stopped. Because he didn't have an answer. Not one that mattered. Not one that would undo the past. Clara nodded once, as if confirming something to herself. That's what I thought, she said. Across the table, Daniel's father cleared his throat, trying to reclaim control of the conversation. Well, regardless, it's admirable that you prioritize family. Admirable. The word felt hollow. as if it were being offered not as recognition, but as a way to close the subject, to move on, to return to something more comfortable. But Clara wasn't interested in comfort anymore. Not tonight. Not everyone has that luxury, she said. The room stilled again, because now the implication wasn't hidden. Daniel's mother looked up sharply. What is that supposed to mean? Clara met her gaze, and for the first time since the dinner began, there was no restraint left in her eyes. It means, she said quietly, some people don't get to choose when things fall apart. Silence. Complete. Unavoidable. Victor didn't move. Daniel didn't speak, and no one laughed, because there was nothing left to misunderstand, nothing left to soften. Only truth, raw and unfiltered. And in the quiet that followed, Clara realized something she hadn't fully allowed herself to admit before. She wasn't uncomfortable because they didn't respect her. She was uncomfortable because she had stayed in a place where she was never meant to be understood. And now that understanding was beginning to surface, not just for them, but for her. The dinner, once a performance of perfection, had become something else entirely, a slow unraveling, of perception, of expectation, of illusion. Victor finally reached for his glass again, taking a small sip before setting it down. Then, almost casually, he said, I've been meaning to revisit that offer. The words were quiet, but they cut through the room like a blade. Clara's breath caught. Daniel turned to her instantly. What offer? But Clara didn't answer. Because she already knew. This wasn't just about a job anymore. It was about a choice. And this time, she wasn't sure she would make the same one. The words didn't echo. They settled, softly, precisely, like something inevitable finally finding its place. I've been meaning to revisit that offer. Victor didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The weight behind it was enough to tilt the entire room. Clara felt it before she reacted to it, that subtle tightening in her chest, the kind that came not from fear, but from recognition. This was a turning point, and everyone at the table knew it. Daniel leaned forward immediately, his earlier composure cracking just enough to reveal something raw beneath it. What offer? His voice carried urgency now. Possession. As if the answer belonged to him. Victor didn't look at him. His attention remained on Clara. I believe we left a conversation unfinished, he said. Clara held his gaze. There it was again. That quiet space he always gave her. Not pressure, not expectation, a choice. But choices were never simple. Not when they came wrapped in consequences. It wasn't unfinished, Clara said carefully. I made a decision. Yes, Victor replied. Under circumstances that no longer exist. A pause. The room seemed to shrink around them. Daniel's mother shifted her fingers, tightening around her napkin. I'm sorry, but perhaps this isn't the appropriate setting. It's exactly the appropriate setting, Victor said calmly. He didn't raise his voice. But something in it made interruption feel impossible. Daniel's father watched him now with narrowed eyes, no longer attempting to disguise his interest. And what exactly are you proposing? Mr. Hale. Victor finally turned his head. Slowly, deliberately. I'm offering Clara a position as director of operations, he said. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was absolute. Even the faint hum of the city outside seemed to disappear. Daniel blinked as if trying to process the words. Director of she would oversee multiple locations. Victor continued, his tone steady. Full authority on staffing systems and expansion strategy. Each word landed with precision. Not exaggerated. Not embellished. Just undeniable. Daniel's sister let out a small, disbelieving laugh. That's not a small role. No, Victor said. It isn't. Clara's heart was beating faster now, but her face remained still. Because this wasn't just an opportunity. It was exposure. Everything she had kept contained controlled quiet. Hers was now laid bare in front of people who had never cared to see it. Daniel turned to her, his expression shifting rapidly between confusion and something sharper. You never told me he offered you something like this. Clara met his gaze. I told you I was busy, she said. It wasn't the same answer. But it was the truth he had chosen to accept. Daniel exhaled, running a hand through his hair again. This is huge, Clara. Huge. Now it was. Now it mattered. Clara felt something inside her tighten, not from anger, but from clarity. Victor spoke again, quieter this time. The position has been open for months. Daniel's father raised an eyebrow. You waited that long. I don't fill roles like this quickly, Victor said. I fill them correctly. A beat. Then I was waiting for her. The words weren't dramatic. They didn't need to be, because the meaning behind them was impossible to ignore. Clara looked down briefly, her fingers brushing against the edge of the table. The polished wood felt cool under her skin, grounding real. For a moment, the room faded, and all she could hear was her own memory. Late nights, empty kitchens, the quiet hum of refrigerators long after closing. Her mother's voice weak but steady, telling her not to give up everything for someone else's expectations. She had built something, not visibly, not loudly, but undeniably. And now it was being acknowledged in a way she hadn't prepared for. Daniel leaned closer, lowering his voice slightly. Why didn't you tell me it was this serious? There it was again. Not curiosity, not admiration, but discomfort. Because now he had to recalibrate who she was. Clara turned to him slowly. Because you never saw it that way, she said. A pause. Then she added softer, You still don't. Daniel flinched. Not visibly, but enough. Victor watched the exchange without interruption, his expression unreadable. Across the table, Daniel's mother finally spoke again, her voice carefully composed. Well, this is certainly impressive. Impressive. A new word. A better one. But still late. She forced a small smile toward Clara. You must be very proud. Clara held her gaze. For a moment, she considered giving her the answer she expected. Something polite, something easy, but she found she couldn't. I'm tired, Clara said instead. The honesty of it landed heavier than any polished response could have. Daniel frowned slightly, tired of what Clara didn't look at him. Because the answer wasn't simple. And it wasn't just for him. Tired of explaining myself, she said. The words settled into the space between them, unavoidable. Victor leaned back slightly in his chair, giving her room, not stepping in, not stepping out, just allowing. Daniel's father cleared his throat, attempting once more to regain control. Well, regardless, this sounds like a remarkable opportunity. I assume you'll accept it this time. Assume. Another expectation. Clara looked at him, then at the rest of the table, then at Daniel. And for a brief moment, everything became very clear. Not because of what had been said, but because of what hadn't. The silences, the hesitations, the things left unspoken for too long. Victor's voice broke through gently. There's no pressure, he said. The decision is yours. Clara nodded once. She believed him. That was the difference. Daniel leaned in again, his voice quieter now, almost urgent. Clara, this could change everything. She turned to him, and this time, she didn't soften her expression. It already has, she said. A long silence followed, because now the shift wasn't subtle anymore. It was complete. The version of Clara they had built in their minds no longer existed, and in its place stood someone they didn't fully understand, someone who no longer fit into the role they had prepared for her. Daniel exhaled slowly, his shoulders tightening. So what are you saying? Clara looked at him, really looked at him, at the man she had chosen, at the man who had never quite chosen her in the same way. I'm saying, she began, her voice steady, that I need to think, not about the job, not really, about everything. Victor nodded once, as if that answer was enough. It's a standing offer, he said. No urgency, no persuasion, just certainty. Clara inhaled deeply, the air filling her lungs, in a way that felt almost unfamiliar. For the first time that night, she wasn't reacting. She was choosing. And somewhere in the quiet aftermath of that realization, she understood something that had been waiting beneath the surface all along. This wasn't just about a career, it was about who she was allowed to be, and more importantly, who she was no longer willing to pretend to be. The dinner continued, but the outcome had already begun to take shape. Not in words, not in decisions, but in the quiet, irreversible shift happening inside her. No one announced the shift. No one stood up. No glass shattered. No voice was raised high enough to mark the moment as a breaking point. And yet, something broke. Not in the room. Inside Clara. It happened quietly, almost invisibly, in the space between Daniel's last words and the silence that followed them. This could change everything. She had heard that phrase before, not from him, from herself, years ago. Back when she still believed that love and respect naturally grew in the same direction. Back when she thought that if she just worked harder, endured longer, proved herself quietly enough, things would align. But sitting there now, across from a man who was only just beginning to see her, she realized something painful. He wasn't seeing her. He was seeing the impact of her. And that wasn't the same thing. Daniel shifted beside her, his knee brushing lightly against hers under the table, a familiar gesture, one that used to ground her. Now it felt like an interruption. "Clara," he said softly, leaning closer. "We should talk about this. Privately. Privately. Of course. Because now it mattered. Because now it was real." Clara didn't turn to him immediately. Instead, she let her gaze drift across the table to his parents, who were suddenly much quieter than before, to his sister, who no longer looked amused, but unsettled. They weren't laughing anymore. They were recalculating. And somehow that felt worse. "There's nothing to clarify," Clara said finally. Daniel frowned. "Of course there is. This is a big decision." She looked at him then. And there it was again, that subtle shift in language. Not you, not us. A decision, an outcome, something to manage. Clara tilted her head slightly. "For who?" The question caught him off guard. "For you," he said quickly. "For us." She held his gaze, steady, unwavering. "You didn't say us earlier," she said. Daniel blinked. "What do you mean?" Clara didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. When they laughed, she said quietly, "You didn't say anything." The words didn't accuse, they revealed. And that made them harder to escape. Daniel exhaled sharply, glancing briefly around the table, as if aware of the audience that still lingered. "That's not fair." Clara's expression didn't change. "Which part?" "I was trying to keep things calm," he said. "It wasn't the right moment to escalate." "Escalate?" Clara almost smiled. Not because it was amusing, but because it was so precise. "So you chose silence," she said. "I chose not to make things worse," Daniel corrected. A pause. Then Clara nodded slowly. "I see." But she didn't. Not the way he wanted her to, because what she saw wasn't caution. It was distance. It was calculation. It was a man who knew exactly how much to say and when to say nothing at all. Victor hadn't moved much during the exchange, but his presence remained steady beside her. Not protective, not intrusive. Just aware. Daniel leaned closer again, his voice dropping lower. "You're overthinking this." That was the moment. Small, almost insignificant, but final. Clara felt something inside her settle into place with quiet certainty. "I don't think I am," she said. Daniel pulled back slightly, frustration flickering across his face now. "Clara, come on. This is my family. They didn't mean—" "They meant exactly what they said," she interrupted gently. The table went still again, because now there was no room left for reinterpretation, no softening, no excuses. Daniel's mother shifted uncomfortably. "I think perhaps we should." "No," Clara said, turning to her calmly. "It's all right." Her tone wasn't sharp, it was steady, and that made it harder to dismiss. "I understand," Clara continued. "I understand how you see me." A pause. Then she added, "I just didn't realize Daniel saw me the same way." Daniel's head snapped toward her. "That's not true." "Then why didn't you say anything?" she asked. Silence. Not because he didn't hear the question, but because he couldn't answer it. Not honestly. Not without unraveling something he wasn't ready to face. Clara watched him carefully. And in that moment, she wasn't looking for reassurance anymore. She was looking for truth. What she found was hesitation. Daniel ran a hand through his hair again, his composure slipping further. "You're turning this into something it's not." Clara's voice softened slightly, but it didn't weaken. "No," she said. "I'm finally seeing it for what it is." Another silence. Heavier now, because this wasn't about a job anymore. It wasn't even about his family. It was about something much simpler and much harder to fix. Respect. Victor finally spoke, his voice cutting gently through the tension. "There's a difference between protecting peace and avoiding conflict." No one responded.
because everyone understood who that was meant for.
Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. I didn't ask for commentary. Victor met his gaze evenly. You didn't need to. A beat. Then he looked back at Clara as if the rest of the room no longer required his attention. Daniel exhaled slowly, turning back to her. So, what are you saying, Clara? There was something different in his voice now. Not control, not calm, something closer to urgency, to fear. Clara felt it, and for a brief moment it hurt, because she knew this version of him. This was the man she had fallen in love with, the one who cared, the one who tried, but also the one who only reached for her when something was slipping away. She held his gaze, and this time she didn't look away. I'm saying, she began carefully, that this isn't about tonight. Daniel frowned. Then, what is it about? Clara inhaled slowly. It's about all the times you didn't see me, she said. The words were quiet, but they landed harder than anything else she had said. Daniel's expression shifted confusion, then denial, then something closer to realization. That's not fair, he repeated, but softer this time. Clara didn't argue, because she didn't need to. You didn't come to the hospital, she said again. You told me you were fine. I wasn't. Silence. And you didn't ask. That was it. Not dramatic, not explosive, just complete. Daniel looked at her. Really looked at her now, as if trying to find the version of Clara he understood. But she wasn't there anymore. Not in the way he expected. Not in the way he needed. Victor stood slowly from his seat. The movement was calm, unhurried, but it drew attention. I should be going, he said. Daniel's father blinked, caught slightly off guard. So soon? Victor nodded. I've taken enough of Clara's evening. The wording was deliberate. Clara noticed. Of Clara's evening. Not theirs. Daniel stood as well, instinctively. We can continue this conversation another time. Victor looked at him briefly, then back at Clara. The offer stands, he said simply. No pressure, no expectation, just certainty. Clara nodded once. Thank you. Victor gave a slight incline of his head, then turned toward the door. And just like that, the balance shifted again. But this time, it didn't settle back, because something had already been set in motion, something that couldn't be undone with apologies or explanations. As the door closed behind Victor, the room felt different, quieter, but not in the same way as before. This wasn't polite silence. This was aftermath. Daniel turned to Clara again, his voice lower now. We need to fix this. Clara looked at him, and for the first time that night, she felt no confusion, no hesitation, only clarity. Some things aren't meant to be fixed, she said. The words hung in the air, unanswered, because deep down, they both knew she wasn't just talking about the dinner. The door had already closed, but its echo lingered. Not in sound and feeling. A quiet, hollow shift that settled into the room like dust after something fragile had fallen and shattered too subtly for anyone to name out loud. No one moved at first. Daniel stood beside his chair, his hand still resting against the backrest, as if he had forgotten what he intended to do next. His parents remained seated, their earlier composure now fractured into something more uncertain, more human. Clara didn't look at any of them. Her gaze rested on the table, the half-finished glasses, the untouched food, the faint smudge of lipstick on the rim of her wine glass. Evidence of a night that had begun with careful intention and slowly unraveled into something none of them had planned for. I think Daniel's mother said quietly, we should all take a moment. A moment. Clara almost smiled. Moments were what people asked for when they didn't know how to face what had already happened. But moments didn't undo truth. They only delayed it. I don't need a moment, Clara said. Her voice wasn't sharp. It wasn't cold. It was simply certain. Daniel turned to her, something fragile in his expression now. Clara? She stood slowly. The movement was unhurried, but it carried a finality that no one could ignore. The soft scrape of her chair against the polished floor echoed louder than it should have. For a second, no one spoke, because standing meant something. Standing meant the evening was no longer contained within polite conversation. Standing meant choice. I think I should go, she said. The words were simple, but they landed heavier than anything else she had said that night. Daniel shook his head almost immediately. No, don't do that. Don't do that. Not please stay. Not.
I understand. Just don't. Clara looked at him, and for the first time she noticed the difference. I'm not doing anything, she said softly. I'm leaving. Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. We can talk about this at home. Home. The word lingered between them. Clara felt it press against something deep inside her, something that used to feel safe. Now it felt uncertain. I don't think that's a good idea, she replied. Daniel's brow tightened. Why not? Clara hesitated. Not because she didn't have an answer, but because she wasn't sure he was ready to hear it. Because I don't know what that means right now, she said. The honesty of it seemed to catch him off guard. What do you mean? He asked, his voice quieter now. Clara exhaled slowly, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the table, one last time before letting go. I mean, I'm not sure where I fit in your life, she said. Silence. Daniel stared at her, searching her face for something reassurance maybe, or a sign that this was temporary, that it could still be contained, controlled, resolved. But Clara wasn't offering that anymore. Not tonight. You're my fiancé, he said. The words came quickly, almost instinctively, as if the title alone should be enough to anchor everything else. Clara nodded slightly. I know what I'm supposed to be, she said. I just don't know if that's who I actually am to you. Daniel's jaw tightened. That's not fair. Clara didn't respond immediately, because fairness wasn't the point. Truth was. Across the room, his father shifted his voice low but firm. Daniel, perhaps this isn't the time. No, Daniel said sharply. This is exactly the time. The tension in his voice startled even himself. Clara saw it, that flicker of something unraveling. Not anger, not entirely. Fear. He turned back to her, his tone softer now. You're overreacting. It was just dinner. Things got out of hand. Clara held his gaze, and for a brief moment, she wished he were right.
She wished this could be reduced to a single evening, a series of unfortunate words, a misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with time and effort. But she knew better. It wasn't just dinner, she said. Daniel exhaled, frustration creeping back in. Then what is it? Clara stepped back slightly. Just enough to create space between them. Physical, emotional, necessary. It's everything that led to tonight, she said. The room went still again, because now they were no longer talking about something that could be fixed with apologies. They were talking about patterns, history, the quiet accumulation of moments that taken alone seemed small, but together became impossible to ignore. Daniel ran a hand through his hair again, pacing once before stopping in front of her. Then tell me what you want. The question hung there, heavy, complicated, because for so long Clara had known exactly how to answer it. She wanted peace. She wanted stability. She wanted love that felt like certainty. But now, those answers didn't feel complete anymore. Clara looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, she allowed herself to consider something she had avoided for too long. What if wanting him wasn't enough? I want to feel respected, she said finally. The simplicity of it made it heavier. Daniel frowned slightly. You are respected. Clara shook her head gently. Not when it matters, she said. Silence. Not defensive this time. Not dismissive. Just quiet. Because deep down, he knew. Daniel's shoulders dropped slightly, the fight leaving him in a way that felt unfamiliar. I didn't think it was that serious, he admitted. There it was. Not denial, not deflection. Truth. Late, but real. Clara nodded once. I know, she said. And somehow that made it worse, because it meant he hadn't ignored her pain. He simply hadn't seen it as important enough to act on. Daniel took a step closer again, his voice softer now, almost fragile. So what happens now? Clara didn't answer right away. Because this was the part that couldn't be rushed. The part that required her to be honest. Not just with him, but with herself. She glanced briefly toward the door Victor had exited through. Not because of him, but because of what his presence had revealed. A version of her life that existed outside of this room. Outside of this relationship. A version where she didn't have to explain her worth, where she didn't have to shrink herself to be accepted. She looked back at Daniel,
and something inside her settled. Not into anger, not into sadness, but into clarity. I don't know yet, she said. The honesty of it filled the space between them. Daniel swallowed, nodding slowly, as if trying to accept an answer that gave him nothing to hold on to. Clara reached for her coat. The fabric felt heavier than usual, or maybe it was just the weight of the moment settling into her shoulders. Daniel watched her, his voice quiet now. You're really leaving. It wasn't a question. Clara paused for a second. Then, yes. No hesitation, no apology, just truth. She walked toward the door, slowly, each step steady, deliberate. Not rushed, not uncertain. Behind her, no one spoke, because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't come too late. As her hand reached for the handle, she stopped. Just for a moment. Not to turn back, but to breathe. To feel the weight of everything she was about to step away from and everything she might be stepping into. Then she opened the door. The cool night air met her instantly sharp and real against her skin. And as she stepped outside, she realized something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not relief, not yet, but space. And sometimes that was where everything began. The night air felt different once the door closed behind her. Not colder, not quieter, just honest. Clara stood on the stone steps for a moment, her breath visible in the faint chill, her fingers still wrapped around the edge of her coat, as if she hadn't fully decided whether she was leaving or simply stepping away to think. Behind her, the house glowed. Warm light spilled through tall windows, soft and inviting to anyone who didn't know what had just unraveled inside. From the outside, nothing had changed. But Clara knew better. She had lived inside that illusion long enough. A car passed slowly at the end of the street, headlights cutting through the dark before disappearing into the distance. The city beyond continued as it always did, indifferent, relentless, alive. She inhaled deeply, and for the first time that night, the air didn't feel heavy in her lungs. Clara, Daniel's voice, closer than she expected. She closed her eyes for a brief second before turning around. He stood just a few steps behind her, his jacket thrown on hastily, his expression no longer controlled, no longer measured, just real. I couldn't let you leave like that, he said. Clara studied him quietly. There was something different in the way he looked at her now. Not distant, not distracted, but present, fully. And somehow, that made everything harder. You didn't let me leave, she said softly. I chose to. Daniel nodded, accepting it without argument. Then, let me choose to come after you. A pause. The words lingered between them, fragile, in a way neither of them was used to. Clara looked away briefly, her gaze drifting toward the empty street. This isn't something you can fix in one conversation, she said. I know, Daniel replied quickly. I'm not trying to fix it. I need you to understand. Clara turned back to him. Understand what? Daniel exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair again, though this time the gesture felt less like habit and more like someone searching for clarity. I didn't realize how it looked, he said. The way they spoke to you, the way I didn't step in. Clara didn't interrupt. Because this mattered. I thought keeping the peace was the right thing, he continued. I thought if I didn't escalate, it would just pass. He let out a quiet, almost humorless breath. But it did it. Clara shook her head gently. No, she said. Silence settled between them. Not tense, not yet, just open. Daniel stepped a little closer, but not enough to close the distance completely. I grew up in that house, he said. You learn early on how things work, when to speak, when not to. Clara watched him carefully. There was no defensiveness in his voice now, only honesty. They don't argue, he added. Not really. They control things, conversations, perceptions, outcomes, a pause. And I guess I learned to do the same. Clara felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness, not quite, but understanding. And understanding, she had learned, was dangerous. Because it made it harder to walk away. That doesn't make it okay, she said quietly. Daniel nodded. I know. Another step closer. Still careful, still unsure. I should have said something, he admitted. Not because of them, but because of you. The words landed softly, but they carried weight. Clara held his gaze. You didn't, she said. I didn't, he repeated. No excuses, no deflection, just truth. The kind that came too late to undo anything, but maybe not too late to matter. A faint breeze moved through the street, brushing past them, carrying the distant hum of the city. Daniel looked at her, his voice quieter now. I don't want to lose you over this. There it was, the fear, raw, unfiltered.
Clara felt it in her chest, not as pressure, but as something heavier, because she knew that feeling. She had lived inside it for a long time. I don't want to lose me over this, she said. The words slipped out before she could soften them. Daniel stilled, not because he didn't understand, but because he did. A long silence followed, the kind that didn't need to be filled, because everything that mattered had already been said. Daniel's voice, when it came again, was almost a whisper. Is there still a place for me in your life? Clara looked at him, really looked at him, at the man she had built a future around, at the man who had in his own way loved her, but also the man who had stood still when she needed him to stand beside her. I don't know, she said. The honesty didn't break. It didn't soften. It simply existed. Daniel swallowed, nodding slowly, as if accepting something he couldn't change.
I don't expect you to have all the answers tonight, he said. Clara didn't respond, because that wasn't the part that mattered. What mattered was what came next. Daniel hesitated for a moment. Then, there's something else, he said. Clara's gaze sharpened slightly. Something in his tone had shifted again. Not fear this time, something heavier. What is it, she asked. Daniel looked down briefly, then back at her. I knew about the offer, he said. The words didn't hit immediately. They settled, slowly, like something sinking beneath the surface before the impact reached the shore. Clara blinked once, then again. What she said quietly. Daniel exhaled, his shoulders tightening. Victor told me, months ago. The air between them changed. Instantly. Completely. Clara felt it, not as anger, not yet, but as something sharper, something colder. And you didn't tell me, she asked. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Daniel shook his head slightly.
I thought you'd already decided. That wasn't your decision to make, she said. I know, but you made it anyway. Silence. Daniel didn't deny it, because he couldn't. Clara felt something inside her shift again. Not breaking this time. Closing. Why, she asked. The question was simple, but the answer wouldn't be. Daniel hesitated, and in that hesitation she already knew. I didn't want things to change, he said finally. There it was. Not ambition, not strategy. Fear. I liked our life the way it was, he continued. I liked knowing where we stood. Clara stared at him. And you thought my growth would threaten that, she asked? Daniel ran a hand through his hair again, frustration flickering across his face. I didn't think about it like that. Clara nodded slowly. No, she said. You didn't think about it at all. The words landed harder than anything else she had said, because they were true.
Daniel took a step forward, desperation creeping in now. That's not fair, Clara. I was trying to protect what we had. By holding me back, she asked. I wasn't holding you back. You kept something from me that could have changed my life. Silence. Sharp. Unavoidable. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it, because there was no way to argue with that. Clara felt the weight of it settle fully now. Not just the dinner, not just the silence, but this, the quiet decision he had made for her, without her. I need you to understand something, she said, her voice steady again. Daniel looked at her, his expression fragile. What? Clara held his gaze. And this time, there was no hesitation left. I could forgive ignorance, she said. I could even forgive fear. A pause. Then, but I can't forgive being diminished. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to, because their meaning was final.
Daniel stood there unmoving, as if something inside him had just collapsed under the weight of what he was hearing. Clara stepped back. Not dramatically, just enough. I'm not angry, she said softly. And it was true. I'm just done trying to be smaller so you can feel comfortable. Daniel's breath caught slightly, because that was the truth he hadn't been ready to face. Clara turned away. Not because she wanted to leave him like this, but because staying would only blur something she had finally seen clearly. Clara, he started. But she didn't stop. Because if she did, she wasn't sure she would leave at all. And this time, she needed to. The distance between them grew with each step she took down the path, the sound of her heels against the stone soft but steady. Daniel didn't follow. Not this time, because somewhere deep down he understood. Some things couldn't be chased, only faced, and sometimes too late. The city didn't notice when Clara Whitmore walked away. Chicago still pulsed with the same relentless rhythm, taxis cutting through intersections, office lights, flickering off one by one, strangers brushing past each other without a second glance. Life moved forward. It always did. And for the first time in a long time, Clara let it. 3 weeks later, the air felt different. Not because the season had changed, but because she had. Her apartment was quieter now, not empty, just hers. The silence no longer pressed against her chest like something waiting to be filled. It didn't echo with questions or unfinished conversations. It simply existed steady and unintrusive, like a space she had finally learned how to occupy without shrinking. A mug of coffee sat untouched on the kitchen counter, steam curling upward in soft spirals. Papers were spread neatly beside it. Reports, projections, handwritten notes, layered with careful precision. Work, but not the kind she used to survive, the kind she chose. Clara leaned against the counter, arms folded loosely, her gaze drifting across the city skyline beyond her window. The same buildings, the same lights. But she no longer felt like she was looking at a life she didn't belong to. She was inside it now, fully. The offer hadn't changed. Victor hadn't followed up with pressure or reminders. No emails filled with urgency, no calls demanding a decision, just one message. The door is open when you're ready. That was all. And somehow, that had mattered more than anything else. Clara reached for her phone, her thumb hovering briefly over the screen before unlocking it. The message thread was still there, unanswered. Not because she didn't know what she wanted, but because she had needed time to make sure the decision was hers. Not a reaction, not an escape, a choice. Her reflection caught faintly in the dark glass of the window. For a moment she studied it, the same face, the same woman, and yet not the same at all. Daniel had called, more than once. At first she had let it ring, not out of anger, but because she didn't know what version of herself would answer. Eventually she picked up. The conversation had been calm, careful, like two people standing on opposite sides of something fragile, both aware that one wrong step could shatter whatever remained. "I've been thinking," he had said. Clara had almost smiled at that, because for once, so had she. "I know I hurt you," he continued, "and I can't undo that." She hadn't interrupted, because this wasn't about hearing what she already knew. "I don't expect you to come back," he added. "I just wanted you to know I see it now." See? The word lingered. Clara had closed her eyes briefly, letting it settle. "Thank you," she said, and she meant it. But gratitude wasn't the same as reconciliation. They both understood that. "Are you happy?" Daniel asked after a pause. The question had surprised her, not because of what it asked, but because of how simple it was. Clara had looked around her apartment then. The quiet, the stillness, the absence of pressure. And she realized happiness wasn't loud. It wasn't overwhelming. It was this. "I'm at peace," she said, and that was enough. Now standing in her kitchen, weeks later, Clara exhaled slowly and picked up her phone. Her thumb moved this time. No hesitation. "I'm ready." She hit send. The response came minutes later. "Good. Let's build something that reflects you." No excitement, no exaggeration, just clarity. Clara smiled faintly. Because that was what she had been searching for all along. Not approval, not validation, but alignment.
Her first day didn't feel like a transformation. There was no dramatic entrance, no moment where everything suddenly shifted into something cinematic and undeniable. It felt natural, as if she had stepped into a version of her life that had been waiting patiently for her to arrive. The office overlooked the river's sunlight, reflecting off the water in quiet, moving patterns. Conversations flowed around her, focused, intentional, grounded in purpose rather than performance. People didn't question her presence, they expected it, and that was new. Victor met her briefly, offering a nod that carried more acknowledgement than any formal introduction could. No need to prove anything, he said. Just do what you already know how to do. Clara nodded. Because she understood now, her worth wasn't something she needed to demonstrate, it was something she carried.
Weeks turned into months. The work was demanding, long hours, difficult decisions, systems that resisted change before finally bending under persistence and clarity. But Clara didn't feel overwhelmed. She felt engaged, alive in a way that didn't drain her. Because this time, she wasn't trying to fit into something, she was shaping it. One evening, as the city softened into dusk, Clara found herself walking along the river alone. The water moved steadily beside her, reflecting the fading light of the sky. She paused near the railing, resting her hands lightly against the cool metal. There was no dramatic realization, no sudden wave of emotion, just a quiet understanding settling into place. She hadn't lost anything. Not really. She had let go of something that no longer fit, and in doing so, she had found something else herself. Her phone buzzed softly in her pocket. A message, unknown number. For a moment, she considered ignoring it. Then she opened it. I hope you're doing well. No name. But she knew. Clara read it once, then again, and for the first time, it didn't stir anything complicated inside her. No ache, no hesitation, just distance. Not cold, not bitter, simply complete. She typed a response. I am, then paused, before adding, I hope you are too. She sent it, and that was it. No lingering, no unfinished edges, just closure. The city lights flickered on one by one, stretching endlessly into the horizon. Clara looked out at them, her reflection faint against the glass of the water below. For a long time, she had thought freedom would feel like something explosive. A break, a release. But now she understood freedom was quieter than that. It was the absence of needing to prove yourself, the absence of shrinking, the absence of waiting to be seen. It was standing still and knowing you already are. Clara Whitmore didn't become someone new. She became someone true. And in the end, that was everything.